rain had been falling since dusk, and by 10 o'clock it had settled into something permanent, not the dramatic downpour of summer storms, but the slow, methodical kind that soaks through without announcing itself. The kind that finds the gap in your collar, the kind that makes the asphalt shine like black glass under streetlights. Ethan Cole drove with both hands on the wheel, the way his father had taught him before his father stopped teaching him anything at all. The heater worked in the sense that it blew air, though whether that air was warm depended on your definition of the word. The windshield wipers squeaked on every return stroke, a sound he'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks. That was how long most of his intentions lasted before the weight of the next shift pressed them down into the floor of the truck and left them there. He worked nights at Carver Industrial Supply, a warehouse job that paid $17 an hour and required him to move boxes that weighed between 12 and 80 pounds for 8 hours straight. His lower back had an opinion about this arrangement. His lower back had many opinions, most of them delivered around 3 in the morning, when the painkiller he'd taken at midnight began to wear thin. But the job had benefits. That was the word he'd repeat to himself on the long drives home. Benefits. Health insurance, with a deductible so high it might as well have been a philosophical concept. But health insurance, nonetheless. Dental, which he used. Vision, which he kept forgetting to use. And a schedule, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Monday through Friday. That meant he was home by the time Lily woke up. That was the calculation. That was always the calculation. Lily was 6 years old, and she had her mother's eyes. Not the general shape of them, the specific quality of light they held. Something between curiosity and patience that her mother, Claire, had possessed in abundance, and that Ethan had spent 4 years trying to keep alive in their daughter after Claire was gone. The aneurysm had taken Claire at 31, swiftly and without warning, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, while Lily was at preschool. Ethan had been at work. He'd gotten the call from a hospital number he didn't recognize. He didn't like to think about that afternoon. He had trained himself, quite deliberately, not to. What he thought about instead was the morning routine, the specific texture of it. Lily's alarm went off at 7:15, a small pink clock shaped like a rabbit that had been a gift from Claire's mother, and within minutes she would appear in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, hair stuck to one side of her face, blinking. She was not a morning person, a trait he recognized with quiet amusement as entirely inherited from him. He would have the oatmeal going. He would have the apple slices cut. She would sit at the table and eat with great solemnity, as though breakfast were a ritual that deserved respect, and they would talk or not talk, because sometimes the quiet between them was enough, full of something warm and shared that didn't require words. He lived for those mornings. He arranged his entire life to protect them. The house was small, a 2-bedroom rental in Millhaven, a township 15 miles east of Cincinnati, that had the bones of something that used to matter more than it did now. A tire factory had closed in the 90s. The main street had 3 empty storefronts for every occupied one. But the rent was manageable. And his neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Holloway, a 70-year-old retired school teacher who gardened aggressively and talked to her tomato plants, had become, over the last 2 years, the person Lily called when her father's truck was late pulling in and her rabbit alarm clock had already gone off twice. Patricia never mentioned that this arrangement had grown past what could technically be called favors. Ethan tried not to think about how much he owed her. He brought her firewood in October and fixed her fence posts in April and left casseroles on her porch on holidays, which he suspected was not an equal exchange but was the best he could manage. He was thinking about none of this, specifically, as he drove the county road home. He was thinking about whether he'd left the kitchen light on. Because Lily had mentioned once that she woke up sometimes in the night, and it was easier if the kitchen light was on, and whether his back was going to allow him to stand up from the truck without making a noise, because he'd made a noise last Thursday, and Lily had asked if he was okay, and he'd said yes, and felt the weight of that yes for most of the day. Then he saw the car. It was pulled half onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking orange into the rain. A dark-colored sedan, a Honda, maybe, or a Nissan with the hood up. The hood being up in the rain struck him as particularly futile. the way a man holding an umbrella over a sinking ship might look to someone watching from shore. He drove past it. He was tired. His back hurt. It was 11:40 at night, and the rain was doing what the rain does, which is make everything worse. There were 100 reasons to keep driving. And he thought of most of them in the 4 seconds it took him to pass the car, and see, in his peripheral vision, the woman standing behind it. She wasn't flagging anyone down. She wasn't on her phone. She was just standing there in the rain with her arms wrapped around herself, looking at the dead engine with the expression of someone who has moved past panic into a kind of exhausted negotiation with reality. He drove another 100 yards. Then he turned around. It wasn't a dramatic decision. There was no moment of heroic resolve. He was tired, and it was late. And the woman needed help, and that was the sum of it. The math was simple enough. He pulled in behind her, leaving his headlights on to illuminate the shoulder, and got out of the truck. "Hey," he said. "Engine?" She turned around quickly, startled, and he registered 2 things almost simultaneously. First, she was younger than he'd expected, probably late 20s, with dark hair plastered flat by the rain and a blazer that had been expensive before it got wet. Second, her eyes were doing the rapid, controlled assessment of someone deciding whether a stranger was a threat. He stepped into his own headlight beams and kept his hands visible. He'd learned that people did this kind of assessment. He understood why. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you. I can take a look if you want. I'm no mechanic. But I've kept that truck running for 6 years. So I know my way around a problem." She looked at the truck. She looked at him. Whatever she was calculating, she arrived at an answer. "It just died," she said. Her voice was steady, but he noticed the slight tremor underneath it that people get when they've been holding themselves together through sheer will. "I was driving, and then it was nothing. No warning lights, no sputtering, just nothing." "How long were you running before it stopped?" "About an hour." He nodded and walked to the engine. He pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and started looking. The rain drummed on the hood. After 2 minutes, he found what he was looking for. "Your battery terminal," he said. The negative cables worked itself loose. "Probably been vibrating against the clamp for a while. That's why you had no warning it wasn't a gradual drain. Just a connection that finally lost contact. You got jumper cables?" "No." "I do." He pulled them from behind the truck seat. He kept them there, along with a first aid kit and a flashlight and a folded emergency blanket, because he had a daughter and a truck, and those were the things a person kept, and within 10 minutes he had her car running. He also tightened the clamp properly and told her she'd want to get the terminal replaced when she could, because the corrosion on it was going to cause trouble again. She stood under the lifted hood, watching him work, and he could feel her watching. Not with suspicion anymore. With something else. A kind of attention that he didn't quite know what to do with. When the engine turned over, she exhaled in a way that contained more relief than she'd probably intended to show. "Thank you," she said. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing. I can." "Nothing," he said again, the way he said things when he'd already decided them. He was already disconnecting the cables, coiling them in the practiced way of someone who did this in parking lots and dark roads and never expected anything back. I don't have cash on me, but if I could get your number." "You're good," he said. "Drive safe. Keep to the lit roads if you can." He put the cables away, got back in his truck, and waited until her taillights disappeared around the curve. Then he pulled back onto the road and drove the rest of the way home in the rain, thinking about whether he'd left the kitchen light on. He had. Lily had turned it off herself. She was asleep with her rabbit alarm clock tucked under her arm. He stood in her doorway for a moment, listening to her breathe, then went to bed. Her name was Emma Hargrove. And she was not, technically, lost. She knew exactly where she was. She knew the county road and the township and the distance back to the city. What she didn't know, what she had been trying not to think about for the 40 minutes she stood on that shoulder before his headlights swung back around, was whether the men who had been following her since she left office in Cincinnati had continued past or had simply stopped. Somewhere behind the dark tree line, she had left the office at 9:40, which was late but not unusual. She was her father's director of operations, which was a title that meant she was responsible for everything that kept the machine running, and none of the credit that came from running it. Carlton Hargrove ran Hargrove Capital Group, a private equity firm that managed $11 billion in assets, with the particular confidence of a man who had never been told he was wrong by someone he respected. His daughter had been told she was wrong so many times, and by so many people, that she had stopped expecting to be told otherwise. She had been investigating something she wasn't supposed to be investigating. Not corporate espionage, nothing that dramatic. But someone at the firm had been moving money in ways that didn't appear in any of the reports she was supposed to be reviewing. And the more threads she pulled, the more she found underneath, and at some point 3 weeks ago she had made the mistake of telling someone she trusted what she'd found. That was when the car started appearing. Not always the same car. That was the careful part. Twice, a black Suburban, once a gray sedan. Once, and this was what made her stomach drop, her own building's security SUV. Parked at the far end of her street, in a spot it had no reason to occupy. She hadn't gone to her father. She wasn't ready to go to her father. She had been trying to compile enough documentation to make the confrontation undeniable. And she had the documentation now, most of it, saved in 3 different locations, under 3 different names, and she had been driving to meet a lawyer, a friend from law school, someone she could trust who had nothing to do with any of it, when the car died. And then, a stranger stopped in the rain. She watched him work. She had been trained, in a childhood that involved being the daughter of Carlton Hargrove, to assess people quickly. Her father assessed people for leverage. She had spent most of her adult life trying to figure out what she assessed them for instead. And what she'd landed on was something like sincerity. Whether the performance of a person matched the actual person underneath, this man had no performance. He looked at the engine the way someone looks at a problem they have decided to solve. He didn't try to impress her with his knowledge, or minimize her for not having it. He found the cable, fixed the cable, tightened the clamp, and told her what to watch out for. His hands were calloused. His jacket was wet through. He had clearly just come off a long shift at something physical. He was tired in a way that sat in his bones. She could see it, and he still stopped. Still got out in the rain. Still checked to make sure she had what she needed before he walked away. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask anything. She sat in her running car and watched his taillights until they vanished. And then she sat there a little longer. The security SUV never appeared. Maybe she'd been more rattled than she'd realized. Maybe she'd taken a wrong turn back there somewhere metaphorically, inside herself, and let the paranoia grow a size too large. Or maybe the stranger with the calloused hands had simply appeared at the right moment to make the people watching her change their minds about what kind of night this was going to be. She didn't know which it was. She drove to her lawyer's house and delivered the documents and drank 3 cups of coffee and felt, for the first time in weeks, something approaching safe. But she kept thinking about his hands, the efficiency of them, the complete absence of hesitation. She drove home near 2 in the morning. She sat at her desk and, with a feeling she could not entirely justify, she thought about what she actually knew about him. She knew his truck. She had noted the plate number without quite meaning to a habit born of living in a state of careful attention. She knew the make, the year, the dent above the left rear wheel well. She knew he'd been coming from the direction of the industrial park. She knew he was tired. She knew he'd said "you're good" in the tone of someone who says that and means it absolutely. She found herself pulling up property records. She found herself cross-referencing registration data. She told herself she was just making sure he was who he appeared to be, that she wasn't doing anything invasive, just closing the loop on her own sense of things. She found his name. Then she found what she wasn't looking for. The child's name was Lily Cole, 6 years old. Patient records were private. Obviously, she couldn't access those, but insurance appeals were semi-public, processed through state insurance boards, and there was an appeal filed 8 weeks ago by Ethan Cole on behalf of his minor daughter regarding coverage for a pediatric cardiology treatment plan. The appeal had been denied. A second appeal had been filed. That one was still pending. Pediatric cardiology. She closed her laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Ethan woke at 6:53. 7 minutes before Lily's alarm. This was the only time he was ever early for anything. He lay still for a moment, listening to the house. Rain had stopped sometime in the night. The gutters dripped. A bird was making the argument for itself somewhere in the oak tree by the side yard. He got up without making a noise. He had, over years of this, learned to swing his legs out and stand in a single motion that distributed the work evenly enough to stay quiet, and went to the kitchen. Coffee first, then oatmeal, then apple slices, which required the good knife and a cutting board and a measured patience, because Lily preferred them thin and consistent, and she had never said so explicitly, but he had noticed, the way he noticed most things about her, and he now cut them thin and consistent without thinking about it. At 7:15, the rabbit alarm went off. At 7:19, she appeared. She was wearing the yellow pajamas with the ducks on them, the ones Claire's mother had sent last Christmas, and that Lily had immediately selected as her favorites, and had been wearing approximately 4 times a week ever since. Her hair was a catastrophe. She had one sock on. "Morning, Bug," he said. She said. She climbed into her chair and he put the bowl in front of her. She ate 3 spoonfuls before she looked up. "Did you see a lady last night?" she asked. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Holloway said she saw your truck turn around on the county road from her bedroom window. She says she has insomnia and watches the road sometimes." Patricia Holloway in her bedroom window. "Of course. I helped someone with their car," he said. "She was stuck in the rain. Was she scared?" He thought about this honestly, the way he tried to answer Lily's questions honestly. "A little, I think. Before she knew I was going to help, but then she wasn't?" "I think so." Lily processed this, eating another spoonful of oatmeal with great deliberateness. "Did she say thank you?" "She tried." "What does that mean?" "It means I didn't really let her finish." Lily considered him with her mother's eyes. "That's a little rude, Dad." "Maybe," he said. "But it was late, and she needed to get somewhere safe, and there wasn't a lot of time for the other part. The thank you part." "Yeah." She seemed to accept this. She found her missing sock somewhere under the table and put it on without getting up from her chair, which required a flexibility he found quietly impressive. Then she looked at him again with an expression he recognized, the look she wore when she was thinking about something she wasn't sure she should say. "Are you going to see her again?" "Probably not," he said. "People you help on the road at midnight aren't usually people you see again." "That's sad." "Sometimes," he agreed. She went back to her oatmeal. The kitchen light was on. The oak tree bird had stopped arguing, and apparently won whatever it was arguing for. He sat across from his daughter and drank his coffee, and thought about the pediatric cardiologist appointment in 2 weeks that he had not yet figured out how to pay for, and then he stopped thinking about it because he was sitting across from Lily in the morning, and there were better things to fill the space. Dr. Franklin Webb had been Lily's cardiologist since she was 4 years old. He was a precise, unhurried man who wore bow ties and spoke to children at eye level and to parents with a clarity that Ethan had come to understand was a form of respect. The respect of not softening what needed to be said. What needed to be said, 18 months ago, was that Lily had a structural irregularity in the left ventricle. It was not immediately life-threatening. It was not something that required emergency intervention, but it was something that needed to be monitored carefully, and, in all probability, corrected in the next 2 to 3 years with a procedure that was minimally invasive by cardiac surgery standards and highly effective in outcomes, but which required a specialist center and a surgical team and a recovery period and a price tag that, with Ethan's insurance, after deductibles and co-pays, and the portion the insurer classified as not medically necessary for reasons Dr. Pays, Webb had described as, and he was quoting here, actuarially motivated nonsense, landed somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000. Ethan had $4,300 in his savings account. He'd had more, but the first set of cardiology tests had taken a portion. A second opinion, which Dr. Webb had actively encouraged, had taken another portion. The first insurance appeal had cost him nothing but the hours he didn't have. The second appeal was still pending. He had not told Patricia Holloway the full scope of it. He hadn't told anyone the full scope of it. There was no one to tell, which was a fact. He sat with the way you sit with facts that are large and cold and require you to keep moving anyway. The Tuesday after the night on the county road, Lily came home from school quieter than usual. She ate dinner without asking questions, which for her was a significant departure from the norm, and she went to bed early. At 9 o'clock he checked on her, and she was asleep, but her color was off a grayish pallor around her lips that he had learned to read the way a farmer reads weather. He took her pulse. He sat on the edge of her bed for 20 minutes. He sent a message to Dr. Webb through the patient portal at 9:40. At 10:15 he had a response, asking him to bring her in first thing. He called the warehouse and reported he'd be late. His supervisor, a man named Dennis, who was not unkind, said okay and noted it in the system. At 8 the next morning he sat across from Dr. Webb, and the doctor told him what he'd suspected. The irregularity was progressing on the faster end of the range they'd modeled. Not an emergency, not yet, but the window for the optimal intervention was getting narrower. And he would recommend strongly that they begin the pre-surgical evaluation process, which was the thing that had to happen before the thing that actually cost the money. Ethan nodded. He asked the right questions. He wrote things down. He thanked Dr. Webb, took Lily's hand, and walked her to the truck. She held his hand the whole way. In the truck, she said, "Dad, are you worried?" "I'm thinking," he said. "That's the same thing sometimes." He looked at her. "When did you get so smart?" She shrugged with the extravagant indifference of someone who has always known the answer to this question. He started the truck. He drove home and put her on the couch with a blanket and her favorite movie, an animated thing about a fox and a rabbit that Claire had loved, and that Lily therefore loved, and he sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and a calculator and tried to find a number that would work. He found several numbers. None of them worked. He made lunch. He fed the number back into the calculator 3 more times, looking for something he'd missed. He hadn't missed anything. He thought briefly about selling the truck, but the truck was how he got to work. And without work there were no numbers to calculate at all. He thought about a second job, but the arithmetic there was also cruel. More hours meant less time with Lily, which was the very thing he was working to protect. He thought about calling Claire's mother in Denver, who had some savings, and who loved Lily fiercely, and who would have wired money without a second thought, but who was also 73 and living on a fixed income, and who he could not bring himself to ask. For the same reason he could not bring himself to ask Patricia Holloway, or anyone else who had given enough already by virtue of simply being willing to be in their lives. The ceiling needed painting. The truck needed new wiper blades. Lily needed a new winter coat, 1 size up. The apple in the bowl on the counter had a soft spot that he hadn't noticed when he bought it. Everything was always simultaneously manageable and not quite manageable, balanced on an edge that required constant, exhausting attention. He put the notepad back in the drawer. He told himself he would find an answer. He had always found an answer. That was the story he told himself, and he did not yet have sufficient evidence to stop telling it. He fell asleep on the couch at 8:30, which was shameful by his own standards and completely irrelevant by anyone else's. Lily was in her bed. The house was locked. He had pulled the blanket over himself without quite deciding to. And the television was playing something low and inconsequential. And he was gone. The knock came at 9:10. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. Not the knock of an emergency. Not the knock of a neighbor. The knock of someone who had decided to be there and was prepared to wait. He came awake quickly and quietly. Another thing, years of night shifts had trained into him, and sat upright. He checked the time. He listened. A second set of 3 knocks. He went to the window first. The porch light was on, but its range was limited. And all he could see were 2 figures standing at the door. Both appeared to be wearing dark clothing. His stomach did something cold. He went to the door and opened it with the chain on. There were 4 of them, 3 men in dark coats, not suits. He'd misread the clothing in the dim light. But the kind of high-quality technical outerwear that announces money without advertising it, and a woman behind them, small in the group's arrangement, standing slightly apart. He recognized her immediately, the woman from the county road. Her hair was dry now, pulled back, and she was wearing a coat that fit her in the way expensive coats fit people. and she looked completely different from the person who had stood beside a dead engine in the rain, and she was also unmistakably, unambiguously the same person. He closed the door briefly and took the chain off. "I know this is unexpected," she said. Her voice was the same, that quality of steadiness over something underneath it. "Yeah," he said. "I'm sorry for coming to your home without. How did you find my home?" A pause. The truck registration. He absorbed this. It was what he would have done, in a situation he couldn't quite define, but that apparently included knowing where a stranger lived based on their license plate. He filed this information away. "What do you want?" he said. Not unkindly, but directly. She glanced at the men behind her. They stepped back, not far, but enough. The practiced deference of security personnel who had learned not to crowd the moment their employer was managing. "To talk," she said. "Just talk. I promise I'll take as little of your time as you're willing to give." He stepped back and held the door open. They were in the kitchen. He'd turned on the overhead light, and it was the kind of light that removed atmosphere entirely, which was what he wanted. The three men had stayed outside. He'd made that clear without quite stating it as a condition, and she had communicated it to them without words, a glance that dispatched them to the porch. He made coffee because making coffee gave his hands something to do, and because it seemed like the kind of thing that established normal terms in an abnormal situation. Her name was Emma Hargrove. She told him this herself, which was a choice she didn't have to. He already knew her face, and he would have found the name eventually, though he had not yet tried. The name Hargrove sat in the room between them, with a weight she seemed used to carrying. She told him about the car. About the 3 weeks before the car. About the documents. The appeals process she'd navigated internally. The lawyer she'd been trying to reach when the engine died. She told him with the particular precision of someone who has prepared what they're going to say and has decided to say all of it, because partial truths in this kind of situation are more dangerous than complete ones. He listened the way he listened to things that required understanding fully, without interrupting, with the occasional nod that acknowledged receipt rather than agreement. The coffee finished brewing. He poured 2 cups without asking. "The people following you," he said when she finished. "Did they see me? I don't know. I think the car dying actually helped. It made it ambiguous whether I'd had a problem, whether someone had stopped, what the situation was. I think they passed, but I can't be certain. So me stopping may have created a different risk. Possibly. But I'm handling the larger situation now. Legally. With people who are positioned to manage the risk better than I can alone." He nodded. "Okay. The reason I'm here, I know why you're here," he said. She looked at him. "You do? You looked me up." The registration led to other records. "You're here because you found something." The kitchen was very quiet. A car passed on the distant road. The refrigerator made its small mechanical argument. "I found the insurance appeals," she said. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "Those are semi-public records." "Yes. So you know. I know you have a daughter. I know her name. I know what she needs." He said nothing. "I want to help pay for her treatment," Emma said. He still said nothing. "Not as a transaction. Not as I understand how this sounds. I understand what it looks like. A person from a certain kind of background shows up and tries to solve a problem with money. And the other person in the room is supposed to feel grateful or compromised or both, and I know that's the shape this has right now, and I'm sorry for that." She paused. I stopped a few blocks away and thought about this for a long time. What I was actually doing. What I was assuming. Whether this was about me feeling better or about whether it would help. "And it would help," she said. "Unless I'm wrong about the numbers." "You're not wrong about the numbers." "A silence." "The procedure," he said. "The full cost with the specialist center, and the evaluation and the surgical team, and the recovery period." "Yes, all of it. That's a significant amount of money. I'm aware. I don't know you. I know. I helped you for 8 minutes on a dark road." It doesn't create an obligation," she said. "I know. You're going to say, I don't owe you anything, and you're correct. That's not the framework I'm working from. The framework is... She stopped. She looked at her hands. The framework is that I have the means to help, and you have a daughter who needs help, and you did something kind for me without any expectation of anything in return, and I'm in a position to do something kind for you in return. And the only question that matters is whether you'll let me. Ethan looked at the window. The porch light made a faint oval on the dark glass. He could see the shapes of the three men outside. The patient, still shapes of people trained to wait. I don't want it structured as debt, he said finally. It won't be. I don't want her to know it came from. I don't want her to carry the story of it. She's 6. She doesn't need to understand why she's better. Emma's voice was careful. She'll just know she got better. Yeah. Another silence. Why not anonymously, he said. If it's not about the transaction, why show up? Why tell me who you are? She thought about this for a moment, genuinely, he could tell. Not performing consideration but actually finding her way to the answer. Because I didn't want to do it anonymously, she said finally. Because what you did wasn't anonymous. You were there. In the rain. As yourself. And I wanted to be there as myself too. She looked at him. Even if that's inconvenient. He finished his coffee. He looked at the ceiling, which needed to be painted, and had needed to be painted for 2 years, and had spent that time as the kind of domestic problem that gets crowded out by larger ones. I need to think about it, he said. Of course. I'm not, he stopped. Started again. I'm not the kind of person who asks for help easily. I know, she said, not with pity. Just as a statement of what she'd observed. I can see that clearly. He stood up, which was a signal. She stood up too. Leave me a number, he said. She wrote it on the notepad he'd left on the table from his earlier calculations, right next to the numbers that didn't work. She looked at those numbers for a moment without commenting on them. Then she thanked him for the coffee and walked to the door. And he watched her go. And the 3 men outside rearranged themselves around her like a system coming back into alignment, and they all walked back to the car that was parked 2 houses down, and then the night was quiet again. He stood at Lily's door for a while. She was asleep on her side with the rabbit alarm clock at eye level, the way she always slept. Her breathing was even and full. He watched her the way he'd been watching her for 6 years, with the particular vigilance of a person who has learned that the world can take things without warning, and that watching is not the same as preventing, but it's what you have. He went back to the kitchen. He sat at the table with the notepad. Emma's number was there, next to the numbers that didn't work. He looked at them together for a long time. The thing about accepting help was that it cost something. Not money, that kind of exchange was clear enough, but there was a different accounting. The one that happened in the space between a person's self-understanding and reality. He had built the last 4 years on a particular understanding of himself. A man who managed on his own, who got up early and worked late, and cut the apple slices thin, and kept the kitchen light on, and asked nothing of anyone beyond what they were willing to give. He had built something from that understanding. And it had weight and substance. And accepting what Emma Hargrove was offering would change the shape of it. He understood this clearly. He sat with it, and then he thought about Lily's gray pallor 2 days ago. He thought about Dr. Webb's voice saying the window is getting narrower. He thought about the rabbit alarm clock, and the duck pajamas and the one sock, and the way she said that's the same thing sometimes about thinking and worrying. He thought about cutting apple slices, and whether she would be there to eat them. That was the weight on the other side of the scale. It was heavier. It had always been heavier. He'd been pretending otherwise. He picked up the notepad. He looked at the number. He set the notepad down and went to bed, but he didn't sleep. And by morning he had made his decision with the particular quiet finality of a decision that was never really a decision, just the moment you stopped arguing with something you already knew. He called the number at 7:45 in the morning, after Lily's oatmeal, and before her school bus. Emma answered on the second ring. I'll accept the help, he said. For Lily. Not for me. I understand. There are conditions. Okay. She doesn't know the source. Not yet. Maybe when she's older and can understand it without it becoming the story of her health. I'll tell her. But not now. Agreed. It doesn't create an ongoing relationship. I'm not looking for. He paused. I'm not looking for a patron. I'm looking for a problem to be solved. A pause on her end. And if the problem being solved leads to something else? Naturally? Over time? He didn't have an answer for that. He filed it away in the category of things to be determined by reality, rather than preemption. One more thing, he said, the work. Whatever process this involves, appointments, approvals, whatever, I'm the one who manages it. You provide the resources. I do the work. Lily doesn't see you writing checks or making calls. She sees her father taking care of things. Because that's what I do. That's the part I need to keep. A long pause. Yes, Emma said. That's exactly right. The pre-surgical evaluation began 3 weeks later. Dr. Webb expressed precisely the right amount of professional surprise when Ethan informed him that the insurance situation had resolved not what had changed, just that it had and moved with elegant efficiency into scheduling. Lily, for her part, accepted the news with the characteristic gravity of someone who had been vaguely aware that something serious was happening and had been waiting for the grown-ups to confirm it. When Ethan explained, simply and honestly, that she was going to see a lot of doctors over the next few months because they were going to fix the thing in her heart that needed fixing, she nodded. Will it hurt? She asked. Some of it will, he said. I won't lie about that. But not as much as you might be thinking. And I'll be there for all of it, even the parts at night, especially the parts at night. She seemed satisfied. She went back to her homework, which involved drawing a map of their neighborhood and labeling the streets. And she labeled Patricia Holloway's house with a small flower because she thought Patricia would like that. Emma called once a week. Not to check in on Lily, she was careful about that boundary, held it with a precision that he noticed and respected. She called to make sure logistics were proceeding smoothly, and their conversations were brief and functional, and he found that over the weeks, they developed the comfortable efficiency of people who communicate often enough to know each other's rhythms. He did not examine this development too closely. He was busy. The procedure was scheduled for a Thursday in late March, almost exactly a year after Claire had died. He noticed the date when it appeared on the calendar and said nothing about it to anyone. The world was full of dates that meant things and empty spaces that meant other things. And there was no way to arrange your life that avoided them entirely, and the only sensible response was to walk into them with your eyes open. The hospital was 45 minutes from Millhaven. He drove it in the dark at 5 in the morning with Lily in the passenger seat. She'd been cleared to eat nothing, which she found deeply unfair, wearing her yellow duck pajamas under a zip-up hoodie because she'd decided that this was the correct outfit for what she'd termed her heart appointment. He didn't argue. The surgical team was competent and warm in the specific way of medical people who are very good at what they do and have made peace with the fact that their patients are afraid. Lily was afraid. She was brave about it, which is the harder form, and he held her hand until they had to take her in, and she looked back at him from the doorway with her mother's eyes. He sat in the waiting room for 4 hours and 40 minutes. He read nothing. He drank terrible coffee from a machine. He thought about Claire. He thought about the county road in the rain. He thought about how thin the distance is between one version of your life and another, and how most of the decisions that move you from one to the other feel, in the moment, like nothing at all. A truck that turns around, a door that opens, a number on a notepad. At 2:17 in the afternoon, Dr. Webb came through the doors. He was still in his surgical cap, and he was smiling. It went beautifully, he said. Ethan Cole put his face in his hands for approximately 4 seconds. Then he straightened up, shook the doctor's hand, and said thank you in a voice that came out steadier than he had any right to expect. She was awake within the hour. Pale, groggy, with a dressing on her chest and an IV in her left arm, and the particular expression of someone who has come back from somewhere they can't quite describe and finds the original destination exactly as they left it. Hey, Bug, he said. Hi, she said. Her voice was smaller than usual. Did they fix it? Yeah, they fixed it. Was it bad? You were perfect. The doctor said so. She considered this. I want oatmeal. tomorrow, he said. Tonight it's just the fluids. She looked at the IV with profound suspicion. Then she reached out her free hand and he took it. And they sat like that while the monitors beeped their small, reliable assurances, and the afternoon light moved through the hospital window and made the room, for a moment, quiet and gold. 6 weeks after the procedure, on a Saturday in April, when the oak tree had gone completely green and Mrs. Patricia Holloway was already in her garden at 8 in the morning conducting her annual argument with last year's weeds, Ethan made breakfast. Oatmeal, apple slices, thin and consistent. Coffee, good coffee, the kind he'd started buying because he could afford it now. A small luxury that still felt faintly transgressive. He heard Lily's rabbit alarm. He heard the sounds of her getting up. He heard 7 minutes later the particular pattern of her footsteps that he could identify with certainty as hers and no one else's. She appeared in the doorway, yellow duck pajamas. One sock. Hair collapsed on one side. But her color was right. The specific living quality of it, the warmth in her cheeks and the brightness around her eyes that he had been watching so carefully for so long. It was right. Morning, Bug, he said. She said. She climbed into her chair. She picked up her spoon. She ate 3 spoonfuls, with great deliberateness. Then she looked up. Is the lady coming today? He set down his cup. He looked at his daughter. What lady? The one who came to our house, Lily said. At night. The one you didn't let me meet. But I saw from my window. She said this without accusation, with the matter-of-fact precision of someone who has been waiting at a patient angle for the right moment to deploy this information. She had dark hair. She stood out front and talked to you for a long time. I watched from my window. He was quiet for a moment. What made you think she might come today? Lily shrugged. I don't know. You talked to her a lot after that. On the phone. She looked at her oatmeal, then back at him. She seemed important. She helped us, he said. She helped you. Lily absorbed this. She took another spoonful. How? He thought about how to answer this. He thought about what was true and what was useful, and whether those were the same thing yet. I helped her once, he said finally. And she helped us back. That's all. Lily considered this for a long time. That's fair, she said. He smiled. He looked out the kitchen window at the oak tree, which had its bird again, or a different bird. There was no way to know, making its same argument, in the same branches. Patricia Holloway was on her knees in her garden, a posture of such complete commitment to the earth that it bordered on devotion. She might come by later, he said. If she has time. You can meet her then. Lily nodded. She went back to her oatmeal with the focused satisfaction of someone who has gotten the answer they were looking for and has now mentally moved on to the next question. His phone was on the counter. He looked at it. He didn't pick it up yet. Outside, the morning was doing what April mornings do in that part of the country tentatively, with the uncertain generosity of a season still learning what it's capable of. The light came through the kitchen window at the angle it always came through, and it fell across the table the way it always fell. And the oatmeal was done the way it was always done, and the apple slices were cut thin and consistent. He drank his coffee. His daughter ate her breakfast. The tree in the yard held its bird. After a while, he picked up the phone. You can come by, if you want. Around 10, maybe. She's home. He sent it and set the phone down. 3 minutes later, it buzzed once. He didn't read it right away. He poured a second cup of coffee instead and sat back down across from his daughter, who was telling him about a dream she'd had about a rabbit who lived in a library and had read every book but couldn't tell anyone because they didn't think rabbits could read, which she thought was a very unfair situation for the rabbit. He agreed that it was. He listened to her talk. The morning expanded around them the way good mornings do, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but in the patient accumulation of small things, the smell of coffee, the sound of a spoon, a child's voice in a quiet kitchen, the tree outside holding its bird, the light moving slowly across the table toward a day that had room in it for something more. He picked up the phone. 10 is perfect." He set it down again. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah? Do you think the rabbit told anyone?" Eventually, he thought about it. "I think," he said, "that eventually the right person noticed." And that was enough. She thought about this with tremendous seriousness. "Yeah," she said finally. "Yeah, that makes sense." He drank his coffee. The oak tree bird sang into the April morning and did not stop. He let it sing. There was no reason to be anywhere else. There was nothing that needed deciding right now, and nothing that needed managing. There was only this, the coffee growing cool in his hands. The girl across the table, the light still arriving, quiet and unhurried, as if it too had learned that some mornings are worth taking slowly.